History repeats itself. I mean, there have been similar events in the past that have occurred repeatedly. A powerful, united foreign invader enters into the picture and invades the land. Whenever there was no strong, big central power ruling a large part of India, whenever there were several small, disunited kingdoms ruling several parts of India, an external power invaded India. We discuss about one such event that has occurred repeatedly several times in the Indian history. In the 6th century BC, a major part of the Indian subcontinent, especially from the northern and the northwestern frontier to the central east, was ruled by 16 different Mahajanapada kingdoms. In the northwest were the Gandhara and Kamboja kingdoms. In the east, we had Magadha, Kashi, Anga and Malla kingdoms. There used to be a fight for dominance in this region, and especially it was greater between the Gandhara, Kamboja and Madra kingdoms in the northwest. And one fine day, iron ores were discovered in the Magadhan region, which became a game changer in Magadha. The Magadha region kingdoms could possess the most advanced weapons made of iron at that time in the entire subcontinent. With a fertile land and advanced weaponry, Magadha became a prosperous region. Bimbisara comes to power and extends the Magadha empire by occupying the nearby Anga. Then his son Ajatashatru further extends it by occupying Kosala and Vaji, and the Magadhan empire becomes a big and strong empire with the merging of several Mahajanapadas. This was the story in the east. But in northwest, the Kambojas, the Gandharas and the Madras used to fight among themselves and were individually much weaker compared to the Magadhan empire. There was a political disunity among them, and this political disunity was a blessing for a foreign invader. So Darius of the Achaemenid Empire from Persia was expanding his empire, and to his east, he saw 3 kingdoms fighting with each other. He just simply invaded the northwest and annexed the entire northwest until Punjab, and he made it the 28th province of his empire. Darius didn't push further east towards the Magadhan Empire because 1. He knew it was challenging to navigate his army through dense forests and marshy lands, and 2. Even if he could, he was well aware of the military strength of the Magadhan Empire. You see, he could easily navigate through the mountain passes in the northwest and capture Gandhara and Kamboja because they were divided politically. But he couldn't do the same with the Magadhan Empire because Magadhan Empire was a merger of many kingdoms and was politically united. And because of their political unity, they had a bigger army combined and they fought together. And on the other hand, the Gandharas, the Kambojas and the Madras were disunited, had smaller armies and fought separately. Darius could easily crush them as they fought separately. This is the pattern we observe here. When there is no strong central power in a region, like in the case of Magadha, then that region was vulnerable to a foreign invasion. Suppose Gandhara, Kamboja and Madra kingdoms were entirely united under a single ruler, they might have fought together, and who knows that Darius wouldn't even have invaded the northwest. This is the first of many times this event occurred, and in 328 BC, almost 200 years after the first, it happened again. History repeated again. The first time it was Darius. Now it was a Macedonian emperor from Greece, Alexander. So by this time, the Magadhan Empire had become much bigger and stronger. It had extended up to the Sindh region in present-day Pakistan. The Magadhan Empire was ruled by the Nandas. They had grown on to become the most powerful in the subcontinent. Yet, the northwestern frontier wasn't under their control. When the Achaemenid Empire had weakened under Darius III, this northwestern region had gotten parceled into many smaller kingdoms again, ruled by different rulers. So as I said earlier, disunited small kingdoms are an easy target for imperialist rulers, who are always on the lookout of expanding their empires. So this politically disunited region fell in the eyes of Alexander, who was dreaming of conquering the known world to him. He had thrashed and annexed the Persian Empire from the Achaemenids and set out to the northwest. One by one, he kept on pocketing the small kingdoms into his empire. He captured Takshashila, Kapisa easily. And with respect to his war with Puru, we're not sure who won. We have been taught in our textbooks that Alexander defeated Puru in a tough fight, which is according to Greek sources. But in reality, there are no enough textual evidences in India to support this claim. So suppose even if he defeated Puru, a mighty powerful ruler like Alexander didn't push forward to the east because there was a huge, strong Nanda Empire ruling. They had a big army of 200,000 soldiers, 50,000 war horses, and 6,000 war elephants, and a vast empire. The strength of the Nanda Empire was such that it forced a mighty emperor like Alexander, who had just defeated the invincible Achaemenids, to return back without even putting a fight. The Nanda Empire's size and the political unity in the north protected the mainland Indian subcontinent from an invasion by the all-conquering Alexander. A few years after the Alexander invasion in northwest, the powerful Nanda Empire was overthrown by the tactical brilliance of Chanakya and Chandragupta Maurya. They established the Mauryan Empire. When they came to power, they soon understood the importance of political unity. They wanted the Takshashila and Kapisa, which was vulnerable to foreign invasions and infighting, to be under their control, and they soon annexed them. Chandragupta, backed by Chanakya's tactical brilliance, used tools of war and matrimonial diplomacy in capturing unstable regions. They resisted any foreign invasions with a large, stable and a united empire. Chanakya and Chandragupta together ensured history doesn't repeat itself in their case. They were very pertinent to keep the whole empire politically united. They set out their boundaries and ensured a stable rule. This stable rule is considered to be one of the golden ages of the Indian subcontinent. With the base set by Chandragupta, the Mauryan Empire set on to rule a major part of the Indian subcontinent. See, you observe here a huge empire with a strong central power, and no foreign power could invade it. The northwestern regions also prospered under the Mauryans without having to be on perpetual fighting mode against invaders, or even at least among themselves. I just want to note one thing here. I'm not justifying or batting for smaller states to be forcefully merged with the bigger power to escape invasions. I'm just pointing out the pattern in our history. How, when the Indian subcontinent had a united empire with a strong central power, resisted invasions, but it could not when Indian subcontinent was divided with several smaller powers. So towards the end of the Ashokan rule, the Mauryan Empire started weakening, rubbing salts on the wound. Ashoka's successors were very weak. Many generals of the Mauryan army carved out their own empires from the huge Mauryan Empire. Again, the Indian subcontinent got divided into smaller kingdoms. So it's an easy guess which region is the most vulnerable to invasion when a big empire gets broken into smaller pieces. It's the northwest again, right? It was invaded by the Greeks and then the Scythians from Central Asia. So these Scythians also ruled over modern-day Gujarat and Mathura. And after them, the Parthians from Persia took over the northwest. And then it was invaded and ruled by Kushanas, who came from Central Asia. They didn't push towards Magadhan region because it was ruled by a stronger Shunga dynasty. The north and northwest witnessed continuous invasions for 2 centuries. And while we talk about the north, we shouldn't ignore the south. The southern kingdoms had no threat of foreign invasions. 1, because they were surrounded by sea, and there were no navies back then. And 2, the south was ruled by 3 big and powerful kingdoms: the Cheras, Cholas and the Pandyas. And also, once the Mauryan Empire fell, the Satavahanas emerged in what is today's Andhra and Telangana. All these empires ruled stably without any threat of invasion. Nor even the northern empires tried invading them. So the 300 years after the end of Mauryan Empire, the Indian subcontinent was broken into many smaller kingdoms and was invaded and ruled by some or the other foreign ruler. This time there was no single foreign invader, but multiple. Even they were politically disunited. And after years of continuous invasions, the Gupta dynasty emerged and built a large empire. Although not as big as the Mauryan, but was big enough to keep a large part of Indian subcontinent politically united. They ruled for almost 300 years and witnessed no major invasion. It was only towards the end of the Gupta rule, when the rulers were weak and incompetent, that Huns from Central Asia invaded India. The Huns had great horses and were very skilled in archery, yet couldn't defeat Skandagupta. But after Skandagupta, the next Gupta rulers were weak, and once again the biggest ruling empire started breaking up. The feudatories of the empire, who ruled the Gupta provinces, started declaring themselves independent and carved out their own kingdoms. The Huns kept on invading and further weakened the Gupta Empire. By 600 CE, the Gupta Empire totally collapsed, and Indian subcontinent once again was ruled by several small independent states. Although the Pushyabhuti Vardhana Empire, Harshavardhana's empire, built a huge empire, but his defeat to Immadi Pulikeshi started the downfall of his otherwise successful rule. And once again, the subcontinent was ruled by several different empires. At this time, the first Islamic invasion occurred. After 16 unsuccessful attempts from the Arabs, finally, Muhammad bin Qasim invaded and captured Sindh and Punjab. And from then on, the northwest frontier, which is the most vulnerable to invasions in the Indian subcontinent, fell into the hands of Islamic invaders. History repeated itself again. Big empire with a strong central power starts weakening. Empire breaks, foreigner invades. The most vulnerable northwest again goes into the hands of invaders. The thing is, mainland Indian empires could repel the invasions because they had stronger armies. Although they were divided into smaller kingdoms, they were individually strong enough to resist invasions. Be it the Gurjaras, Palas, Rashtrakutas, Maukharis, the later Guptas, Chalukyas or Pallavas. They were individually strong, and that is why each of them could rule for several years. By the 11th century, the political landscape of the subcontinent was filled with many kingdoms. The Rajputs had emerged as a strong force. Among them, the Chauhans emerged as a dominant force. The Gurjaras and Pala empires were reduced in size. The Cholas and Chalukyas were very powerful in the south. There were smaller empires, and there were a few big empires. But none of them were as big as the Gupta or the Maurya or the Nanda Empire. And surrounding the Indian subcontinent in the northwest was the ever-expanding Ghaznavid Empire. The situation was like this. Indian polity was fragmented with several kingdoms of different sizes and strengths, and mired with internal conflicts among themselves. And there was a big imperial empire expanding and moving towards the northwest. What happens now? History repeats itself again. The Mahmud of Ghazni saw the political situation in India, invades India 17 times and plunders its resources. He looted a lot of wealth and destroyed thousands of temples. He was infamously known as idol breaker, and his most infamous act was breaking the floating shivling of the Somnath temple. With the wealth he looted, Mahmud made his empire wealthy and more powerful. But he did not wish to rule over India, and even most of his successors. They were solely focused on just plundering the wealth of the land, rather than establishing a rule. But after a few years, one of his successors, Muhammad Ghori, didn't have the same intentions. He had ambitions to rule over India, and the political landscape in India very much paved way for it. The subcontinent was ruled by many big and small powers, but no single strong central power. They had internal conflicts among themselves. Muhammad Ghori took advantage of the situation. He waged a war with Prithviraj Chauhan in Tarain. He was defeated decisively and sent back packing the first time. He goes back, learns from his failure, takes a second chance, comes back and defeats Prithviraj Chauhan. So that is why they say, you never give a second chance to your enemies. And this event marked the start of the Islamic rule over India. History repeats itself once again. You see, the subcontinent is ruled by several warring kingdoms. Lack of unity. On the other side, the foreign invaders taking advantage of the disunity and establishing a rule here. One of the main reasons for the Islamic invaders' success was their unity. They united under the name of religion and were backed by a central power, which was the Caliphate from Turkey. While in India, our rulers were disunited. There was no central power. You see, without a central power, if the Chauhans could individually defeat the Ghorids, imagine if an empire of the size of a Maurya or Nanda had fought. They could have definitely resisted the invasion comfortably. And also another reason the Hindu kings lost was their strife to keep up with the ethics of war, while their enemies themselves never complied with it. It's the idealism that was a reason for their failure. So now, after his win, Ghori installed his slave, Qutbuddin Aibak, as the governor of Delhi and went back, which started the Islamic rule in India. For the next 200 years, Delhi was ruled by dynasties one after the other, starting from Mamluk, then the Khilji and the Tughlaq. They captured each kingdom one by one, especially in Alauddin Khilji's rule. He captured Ranthambore, Gujarat, Mewar, Malwa, Jalar, and took control of Devagiri from Yadavas, Warangal from Kakatiyas, Dwarasamudra from Hoysalas, and Madurai from Pandyas. Here again we see that pattern. A disunited polity and a united force with a strong central power defeats them one by one. But at least the Delhi Sultanates managed to resist foreign invasions somehow through acts of diplomacy and war. So then, in the Tughlaq rule, the big central empire started breaking, thanks to Muhammad bin Tughlaq's blunders. One of his nobles in Deccan declared independence and began the Bahman rule. Another big force that emerged in the Deccan was the Vijayanagar Empire. There was a strong rivalry between the two empires, and they together largely kept the south independent from the northern Delhi Sultans. Delhi Sultanate started diminishing slowly and getting weaker. Independent kingdoms started to emerge once again. And to the northwest of India, there was the ever-expanding Timur Empire. Timur seized the political landscape in India, plunders Delhi, loots and destroys cities, massacres people and converts many. History repeats itself again. Yet another invasion, exactly like how it happened 3 centuries ago. With this invasion, Tughlaq's rule further weakened and once again many independent states emerged. But they didn't merge. There was no central power. There was always a conflict between them. Timur, after ransacking Delhi, placed Sayyids in the Delhi throne. The Sayyids got replaced by Lodhis, and once again there were many small and big independent kingdoms vying for power in the Indian subcontinent. The political environment was unstable once again. And on one side, Ranasanga of Mewar was slowly expanding and emerging as a big formidable power in the north. He was posing a big challenge to the Delhi Sultanate. Now there was internal rifts within the Delhi Sultanate itself. And in the northwest was a young descendant of Timur and Mughal, Babur, dreaming to rule India. He had heard of the riches of India and the political instability in the region. Babur had thrice tried to invade India, but was unsuccessful. The Lodhis were fighting among themselves. Daulat Khan Lodhi, who was the brother of Ibrahim Lodhi, invites Babur to invade Delhi. Babur, who was waiting for a chance, marches into the mainland and defeats Ibrahim Lodhi in Panipat and establishes the Mughal rule. And from Mewar, a powerful Ranasanga was posing a formidable challenge to Babur's ambitions. A hard-fought battle occurred between the two, but Babur eventually came out victorious and extended the Mughal Empire. Many independent kingdoms, weak central power, political instability, a foreign invader watches and marches to exploit the situation. History repeats itself. The Mughals constantly kept on expanding their empire with tools of war and matrimonial diplomacy over the next 200 years, reaching its peak during the Aurangzeb rule. One of the biggest reasons here is, again, there were many small independent states. A lot of them were individually very strong, but the drawback is they were divided and the invading army was much united. If all the independent states had merged together, it would have been a different story. The Rajputs were powerful enough to shake them, but were divided. The Ahoms from Assam gave them nightmares, but they had no imperial ambitions. The Marathas gave them a hard time, but internal treachery killed the dream of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj's Hindavi Swarajya. Nevertheless, a larger part of Indian subcontinent was repelled from foreign invasions. Almost until Aurangzeb's rule, there was a big empire with a strong center, and they had protected the vulnerable northwestern frontier from other foreign invaders. They made sure no such invasion such as that of Timur or Ghazni happens. But after the tyrannical Aurangzeb rule, Mughal rule started declining. The empire's treasury was almost empty. The later Mughals were weak. Marathas had emerged as a strong force, weakening the Mughals. A number of states which were under Mughal control got independent. History repeats. This time, the foreign invaders did not enter through the usual northwest Khyber Pass, but through the sea. This time not directly through a military confrontation, but indirectly in the disguise of trade. The Europeans entered India as trade rivals, and looking at the disunited political situation, they soon became political rivals. They fought each other to colonize India, but it was the British that eventually prevailed. It was very easy for the much smaller British armies to defeat the much larger native Indian armies. The British didn't go to war all at once against a bigger Mughal Empire and Maratha Empire. When two states fought, they would form an alliance with one and defeat the other and take over their region. They would then sign a treaty with that alliance partner and weaken them. And then they'll turn against their alliance partner itself and capture their territories as well. By this way, they captured Bengal, then the northern Sarkars, then the Carnatic, Hyderabad, Mysore, and then the Maratha provinces, the Sikh provinces, and finally Delhi, getting possession of the whole country. They used our native kings as pawns for their colonial ambitions. Once the Mughal rule started declining, Marathas became the biggest power. The vision of a Hindavi Swaraj was gradually getting fulfilled, but there were internal conflicts within the Marathas itself. And there was opposition from Hyderabad Nizam, Mysuru, and the Nawab of Awadh. If they all had agreed to unite under Marathas, they could have actually defeated the British. In America, the Americans united under George Washington, and that is why they were able to defeat and free themselves from the British. Just imagine, if the Maratha Confederacy was as big as the Mauryan Empire, then couldn't they have pushed the British out? Or at least, if the Mughals were as big as in Akbar times, wouldn't they have kept the Britishers out? Shivaji Maharaj showed the British can be defeated when his small naval force defeated the East India Company's naval forces. All it required was a united fight. If we had a big Maratha empire as big as a Nanda or a Mauryan or a Mughal empire, history has shown us it would have been very, very tough for a foreigner to invade India, or for the fact, impossible. When the land was ruled by many small independent kingdoms, a foreign invader took advantage of the situation. Although we have an exception here. From almost 600 to 1000, even though there was no big empire, the relatively smaller states were powerful enough to protect the land from invasions. Back then, there were no nation states. So there were no well-defined boundaries. So every ruler emerged in the dream of building as big an empire as possible. They were imperial. So a king who didn't wish to be imperial also had to be imperial to survive in the imperial game. Except a few empires, the Ming dynasty of China, the Japanese empires before Meiji, and the Ashokan empire after Kalinga, every empire constantly kept on trying to expand. Every empire was always under threat of getting attacked by another empire. The bigger, stronger, and expansionist empires survived, but the smaller ones couldn't, in most of the cases. Now, we might never see one such pattern because almost every country has a well-defined boundary and are sovereign states. And we hardly see countries being imperial trying to entirely capture others. There are exceptions, but the world we're living now is much more peaceful and stable as it was compared to the past. So what are the lessons that you learned from this pattern of events in history? Please comment down in the comment section. So this was the first episode of History Repeats Itself. I wish to see you soon in another interesting episode of this series. And if you like this episode of History Repeats, do subscribe to our channel.